are. We're continuing today in our sermon series on the Gospel of Mark. We just have about 4 more weeks left in the Gospel of Mark, and then we'll go to the book of Acts. Today's sermon is a follow-up to the song you just heard. It speaks of how Jesus, Isaiah prophesies that he would be a man who is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And today we're going to see Jesus grieving over something like no other thing in probably his entire life. And part of what he's going to be grieving over is the one thing that God cannot do. And that's the title for this sermon. You ever think about that? Like, what is the one thing God cannot do? It's been said, it's kind of like it just kind of a philosophical posturing is to ask this question, and it's attacking really God's omnipotence. It's, can God create a rock so large that, have you ever heard this before? That even he cannot lift it. Can God create a rock so large that even he cannot lift that? Now, I almost hate to share that with you at the beginning of the service because some of you will just be thinking about that for the next 45 minutes, okay? But here's what I want you to understand about God. God can do everything that he has made possible to do, okay? God can do everything that he has made it possible to do, okay? But there are some things, especially one thing, that even God cannot do. It is beyond his power, okay? We'll talk about that here in just a moment. But let's kind of set the stage. Jesus was in the upper room sharing Passover dinner with his disciples. They're making their way to the Garden of Gethsemane, making their way down the hill. It's actually a little walk that we take on our trip to Israel. It's less than a mile. It's about a 15-minute downhill walk. It's really easy. It's prime real estate right outside the walls of Jerusalem, okay? And they come to this place called Gethsemane, okay? It's an olive tree garden. And he says to his disciples as they come in like the gate, it's a large area, it's an area bigger than this, prime land. And we know because one of the other Gospels writes that Jesus went a stone's throw away while he was still in the garden. Well, you know, somebody could throw a stone a really long way. So it's a big garden. He comes to the gate. He sits the 8 who are staying at the gate. Sit here and I want you to pray. And then he takes 3 more with him over to the side. So this is a picture from the Passion of the Christ. It's a little bit probably what it would have looked like in an Olive Garden. And he takes with him Peter, James, and John. These were the guys that he took to see some private miracles, the guys that he took up on the Mount of Transfiguration to see him coming in his power and his glory. These guys got an inside track. So you got some of the disciples like over there by the gate, and then they walk maybe the distance over there to this side or by where Darrell is. And then another stone's throw away, Jesus is out by himself, okay? And while he's taking those 3 over there to talk with them, Mark writes, because Peter was there, right? This is Peter's recollection of the events. Jesus began to be greatly distressed and troubled. Now, we've never seen anything like this in Jesus' life to this point, that he is really stressed out. So much so, this greatly distressed means that he is amazed. Like, it's beyond, this is amazing just in a statement itself. Here's this omniscient being who's learning things to the point of he knows all things, okay, that he is greatly amazed at the stress he is feeling about what is about to occur in his life over the next 12 hours. He greatly distressed, greatly troubled. How troubled was he? Well, it says in the next verse, he says, my soul is very sorrowful. This is that man of sorrows, even to death. So he says, remain here and watch. Remain here and stay awake. That's what I mean, like the guard on watch. Like, I want you to watch. I want you to pray with me. But guys, I need your support right now because my soul is so sorrowful to the point that I feel like I'm going to die. I don't know. This has never happened to me. I've been stressed out to the point that I've grown. Any of you ever do that? Like, you're just so stressed about something that you go, oh. Am I the only one in the room that like has gotten that stress? Oh, I've never gotten to the point that I felt like I was so concerned about something that I was going to die. I mean, really, in psychological terms, this is at the heart of what some call a panic attack, is you think you're going to die. That's why you're panic. I mean, the word panic is another word for the devil. Did you know that? Like the Greek god of the underworld, Pan. So a panic means an attack of fear, okay? And so you're so afraid that you think, I'm going to die. And that's what Jesus, he knows something is coming. He's so stressed out about it, so deeply worried about this, that he feels like he's going to die. Emotionally, spiritually, it's just so stressed out. So he says, I need you guys to be here with me. I share that to say, some of you may have gone through panic attacks before or been so stressed out that you thought you were going to die. Like, I can't empathize with that, but Jesus can. It's amazing to me, the God that we serve. This is what the writer of Hebrews said. We don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So this is one of the things I want you to understand. Like, a lot of times people will guilt you and say you should never feel worried about the future. You should never have concern because we know it's in God's hand and you should not fear. And like, I understand the Bible does command us to fear not, but listen, Jesus Christ himself was so stressed out that he thought he was going to die. Like literally, physically, he is going to die within the next 12 hours, but emotionally, he's in such turmoil, he's at the point of death. And so if you've ever been in that spot before, like, I can't sympathize with you on that, I can't empathize with you on that, but Jesus can. And it's not a sin to think that something's coming your way and just be stressed out about it. But here's the thing, is that Jesus knows what to do. Because listen, my friends, listen. If you know how to worry, you know how to pray. I'll say that again. Like some of you are like, man, I don't know how to pray about this. If you know how to worry, you know how to pray. Because what worry is, it's an intense focus upon a problem that is before you. All the change that needs to take place in your life is that you're turning that focus toward God and giving him the problem that is worrying you. And so you are earnestly, fervently giving to God that which is stressing you out about your future. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He goes a little farther on his own. He's falling on the ground, and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. What is this hour? It's the hour of the power of the darkness, as we see in the book of Luke, okay? It's this hour of suffering that it's about to come on him, okay? And so he says, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. True statement. All things that are possible for God. Since all things are possible for you, Jesus says, remove this cup from me. Like, Daddy, take it away. I love this word here. I mean, Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount, Lord's Prayer, we should pray, Our Father who art in heaven. And that's not typically something Jews did, but to use the word here for Abba, it's like an Aramaic word for dada. Daddy. I mean, if you think about it, like, how many of you as parents, raise your hand on this when I have it, like, how many of you, like, deep down when you had your little baby, that you were hoping that the child would say dada before mama? Will you admit to that? Like, come on, say daddy, daddy. You know, Dee would practice say mommy, mama, mama, you know, and all three of my kids, the first word they said was dada, dada. I was like, yes. All right, so Dee did all the work, I got all the credit, right? So that's just, it's like dada, mama. Phonetically, it's the most foundational pattern of speech. Abba, it's the earliest word. Jesus is going to his daddy right now, not just saying Father who is in heaven, but Daddy, I need you to do this. Maybe you have a little girl, like I'm just really susceptible to this, like even still, she's 22 years old, and she just looks at me with those big blue eyes and said, Daddy, I just melt. I can just imagine, God, she's got me wrapped around her little finger. I feel so sorry for this guy she's marrying. Like, her eyes can manipulate anything. She just has an uncanny ability. And so I remember one time when we were, this daddy stands out to me. we were going on a trip to Israel, and what I did with my kids for their senior trip is I took them to Israel with me, and then we did a little stopover somewhere in Europe on the way there. It just didn't even cost any extra money other than the hotel when we stayed, plane flight wise. So I asked my daughter where you wanted to go, and she's always big with all this English writing stuff like J.R. Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and I don't know, these lady novel stuff. I don't know what they are. Jane Eyre. I don't know. Is that what? I hate all that stuff. So anyway, but that's where she wanted to go. She wanted to see a Broadway show in London. We went to see Lion King. She's all excited. And then we're going to get on the Channel, and we're going over to Paris, okay? So we get over there, and now we're going from Paris out to the airport to fly to, and like I knew everywhere we were going, but she didn't. She just had to stick with me. So we're coming up to this like subway area in Paris. I got the big suitcase. She's got the little drag along there, okay? And we're going, and she gets this part from her mother. Like when you're big crowd, we're moving into the train, you know, like the subway train, and come on, Jonna, we got to go. I get on there, and then I turn around. Jonna's not there. In typical D. Willis fashion, Jonna just stops and pauses and lets everybody get on the train in front of her. And I see her out like, what are you doing? And the doors close. And the moment they close, she realizes, uh-oh, I'm out here. He's in there. I have no idea where we're going. That train is going to leave. And her eyes meet mine. Luckily, I'm tall. I can see out the window. And she lets out this primal scream, not Dad. She goes, Daddy! Luckily, there was somebody on the train that knew the magic button, and it doesn't exist in New York subways. He hits it, the door opens, she comes in, and she just cries. I put my arm around her. She thought for a moment that she would be separated from her daddy. And I will never forget the primal cry that came from her mouth the moment she thought we would be separated. Jesus knows that's coming. He knows he's about ready to face something from his Father that he's never faced before. Dada. Goes back to when he was a baby in the manger. Dada. And he says, Daddy. Whew. Knowing what's coming, is there any other way? Could you please remove this cup from me? But ultimately, the answer to that question is going to be what? No. Son, you've got to go to the cross. Here's why. The one thing God cannot do is violate his character. In order to let Jesus out of the cross, God would have had to violate his character, and he can't do that. He is all-powerful, but even more important than him being all-powerful is that he is all good. Did you know the Muslim God, the Quran, sometimes they say it's the same God. It's not. The Muslim God, as it describes, that Allah can lie. Why? Because Islam values God's omnipotence above his character. It's okay sometimes for a Muslim to lie because in their minds, God can do anything, and if God can do anything, then he can lie. But that's not how the Jewish and Christian scriptures teach us. Hebrews 6:18 says, God being unchangeable, it is impossible for God to lie. His righteousness and goodness outweighs his omnipotence. His character is more important than what he can do. Remember that the person you were created in his image, your character is more important than what you can do. Why? Because God's character is more important than what he can do. He does not have the ability to tell a lie. Moses writes it this way, God is not man that he should lie, or son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and he will not fulfill it? This is at the heart of who God is. He always tells the truth. And throughout the Christian scriptures, he says over and over again, someday I'm going to send a Messiah to save the people from the sins of the world. And he is going to rescue them by giving his life. Jesus said over and over, I'm going to Jerusalem. They're going to put me to death, and I'm going to raise from the grave. And so Jesus is getting there, and he sees what is about to come before him. And he says, man, is there a plan B here? Is there something else we can do? But God is not going to change the plan. Why? Because righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne, as David writes in Psalm 89. Like, this is foundational who God is. He is righteous, he is impeccably good, and at the same time, he will always be just. And because he is just, whenever there is sin, he demands life. Where there is sin, he demands life. Book of Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22 says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. So if Jesus isn't going to go to the cross, then none of us can be forgiven. Heaven would be depopulated and hell would be overpopulated. This is God's plan, is because of his righteousness and justice, it demands that there be punishment for sin. That's what justice is. Where there is wrong, something happens to make it right. Somebody pays the price for that which has been done wrong. So stressful what Jesus sees coming, the punishment for sins of all mankind that's coming. He is so stressed out, the book of Luke tells us this, that an angel came to him from God to strengthen him. I really believe this. Like, why does God send an angel by his side? Is because his physical body couldn't take the pressure of the spiritual trial which was to come. And so the angel comes along to strengthen the Son of Man, the Son of God in the flesh. And being in agony, we see in the next verse, watch this. He prays even more earnestly. That's the thing, when you're worried and stressed, what do? You don't worry more, you pray more. You pray more earnestly. You give it to God. Say, God, I need you to show up here. God, I'm trusting you here. God, I know you're sovereign. I know you're good. I know you're just. So much so that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. There's a word for this in medical science. It's very rare, but it does occur. It's called hematidrosis. Okay? Hematidrosis. And what that means is, it's describing is your capillaries when someone gets so stressed, and it literally is to the point of death. Like this is one step before your heart exploding and you just dying. Is to relieve the stress on the heart. It's pumping so hard and it's so stressed that the capillaries, that which connect the arteries and the veins, the capillaries there, they start to burst near the surface of the skin. And what happens is that blood that comes out of the capillary gets into your sweat pores and comes out to the surface of your skin, so much so that you sweat, that your sweat is mixed with blood. And that's what Jesus is enduring here in the garden. Sweating drops of blood. So serious, here's the question I'm asking you next. What is Jesus facing that is nearly stressing him to death? Now, a lot of people would say, and this is the natural way of thinking, Jesus is stressed out because he realizes the physical torture he's about to endure. But here's what I want you to understand. That's not what would have stressed Jesus out to the point of death. See, the Bible is filled with stories, Hebrews 11 especially, where people who are about to be eaten with wild animals, they don't sweat drops of blood. People that are about to have their skin ripped off. We read that about some of the disciples, like they're shot to death with arrows. That's a bad way to go. The worst one, I think, is the one Andrew or Bartholomew, where they said that they literally ripped the skin off of his body to the point at which he died. They skinned him like a deer. And they told him what he was going to do, but yet he faced that. Peter himself was crucified upside down, but yet he didn't sweat drops of blood. Listen, there were lots of people who were tortured to the point of death, but they weren't this stressed out as Jesus was. Why? Because it's not the physical pain that Jesus is about to go through that is stressing him so much. It's the spiritual torment that he is about to face. And so he's praying, God, take this away from me. To say it again another way, he said, remove this cup from me. What is this cup that is causing his blood vessels to burst. Here it is. Listen. Jesus and only Jesus knows what's coming next. Not just the cross. He's seen that before. Human beings have tolerated that before they died. Jesus and only Jesus is the only human being who has ever walked this earth who has any understanding whatsoever when we talk about the cup of God's wrath. Jesus is the only one that knows what that means. Jesus is the only one who has seen it in its full force. Some human beings have seen it afterwards, looking backwards, seen just a glimpse, a little bit of God's wrath. Jeremiah writes, "Thus saith the Lord, God of Israel, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath." Isaiah says it this way, chapter 51, verse 17. Wake yourself, stand up. This is another way of saying watch, watch, watch. See, it's very biblical what I do when I wake you guys up, right? Watch, watch, watch. Pay attention. I'm just trying to be like the prophets, okay? Stand up, O Jerusalem. You have drunk from the hand of the Lord of the cup of his wrath. We're seeing just a glimpse of that in our country right now. Romans 1 tells us this, is that when you see men forsaking natural relationships with women for other men, that's a picture that the wrath of God is upon you. When you see people confused about their gender identity, that is a picture that the wrath of God is upon our nation. We don't know male from female anymore. That's just the beginning of it. But there's something else about the full force of God's wrath that we don't want to think about very much, but Jesus knew exactly what was coming upon him. We get a picture of the full cup of wrath in Revelation chapter 14. John writes this vision that he has of the future, that there's an angel saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image, talking about during the time of tribulation which is to come, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength. It's not diluted, 200 proof, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented, those who take that mark. Let me tell you what, like the time they tell me to wear a mark on my forehead or my hand to show that I've had a vaccination, I'm not taking it, okay? I'll just tell you, I'm not taking it. People say, man, that's crazy. But maybe it is, maybe it isn't the mark of the beast, but I'm not taking that chance because I don't want to deal with the pulled forward. Like, I'm not risking on this. I'm not taking a mark here from anybody. Pulled full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Like, I'm not taking that mark. Nobody needs to take some mark showing that they're in or whatever. Like, not here, not here. I'll put it somewhere else, but not there. Why? Because what this is saying is, if you take that mark showing that you worship the beast and that you value the things of this world over the things of God, if you take that, you're never going to rest from the full torment of God, the wrath of God upon you. There will be no rest. And it will last day and night forever and ever. This fiery lake of sulfur. Like, we don't like to talk about this, but listen, Jesus talks about it. Listen to what I'm about to say. Listen, all right? Jesus talks more about hell than anybody else in the entire Bible combined. I think there's a reason why Jesus talks about it more than anybody else. He gives more detail about it than anybody else because he's the only one that knows just how bad hell is because he created it. He talks about hell. He's the only person ever walked the face of the earth that knows that hell will be a place of eternal torment. Listen, like, we see these books like top 20 all-time book, Heaven is Real. Have you ever heard that book? You know the book I'm talking about, Heaven is Real? Like, you read it like, oh, it feels good to read this, but whether or not that's true, I don't know, all right? But you read it there and you're like, oh, that's a cool story, whatever, okay? Like, so millions of books. Like, what book is everybody reading called Hell is for Real? Like, who visited there and came back and said, hey, let me tell you this story. You don't go there and come back. You don't get a vision of hell. In fact, Jesus teaches that in Luke chapter 16. If someone goes to hell in that place of agony and torment, it's a picture of a man, a rich man that has gone to hell, and he's looking up into heaven and says, somebody get me out of this place. And Abraham shouts out to him and says, man, listen, once you're there, there's no leaving. And then Jesus says, the man is then saying, well, hey, please go back and warn my family because I don't want anybody to be down here. You ever hear people joke like, man, I'm going to hell because that's where all my buddies are going to be. Let me tell you what, if your buddies are already there, they would send you a message if they could. You don't want to be here with us. It is a horrible, horrible place, torment forever and ever. And Jesus knows that because he created it. And he says, you want no part of it. Jesus describes in Mark chapter 9, verse 43, it is an unquenchable fire. It cannot be put out. In Mark chapter 9, verse 48, it's a place where worms do not die. They're constantly eating at your skin. It's a place in Matthew 13:42 where Jesus warns, it's a place where people will gnash their teeth in torment and anguish and regret. It is a place where people beg for their families not to come. This is the place in Matthew 25 that Jesus says people will be confined to an outer darkness, completely as far away from possible from the love and light of God. He even compares it to a dump where trash is piled on year after year after year and the burning never ceases. Hell, my friends, is for real, and it's a terrible, terrible place. We don't talk about it much. Really, I really haven't talked about it much here in church. I don't want to be known as the hellfire damnation guy in Murfreesboro. Why don't we talk about it? Well, it's because it's so awful. We have a hard time processing any idea of what hell's like. Some of you may have heard the name R.C. Sproul. He's a theologian, pastor that passed away not long ago. And they asked him toward the latter part of his years, they said, Dr. Sproul, what theological concept in the Bible do you have the most difficulty understanding? And he quit back immediately. It's the doctrine of hell. He struggled with it. And then he went on to explain why. And he gave two things here that I'm going to share with you. To understand hell, we must first understand two things about God. I'm going to share those. The first one is this, and R.C. Sproul does it in a way that I just never could. But he explains, first of all, that to understand hell, the first thing you have to understand is the character and holiness of God. How great is God? He is so perfect. He is so loving. He is so benevolent. He is so righteous. He gives us every good thing, including the breath that is in our lungs. We would have nothing, my friends. Listen, absolutely nothing. Not only did he send his son to die for us on the cross, but everything that we have in this life that is good, we have because God creates it and sustains it for us. And to sin... Now, to transition to the second part, listen, to sin against the God, like we're greedy, like I want to have more and more. You're trying to take things that God hasn't given to you, like that belong to somebody else, or only be confined within certain parameters that God, like he's given us so many things, and yet it's like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God gave them 10 billion trees that they could eat from the fruit, right? And he puts one in there, and guess which one they go after the fruit? Like they're hanging around which one tree in the entire planet? The one he said, don't eat from this one. Because in order to demonstrate that we love God, he has to give us a choice to demonstrate that we love God. And so he just gave them one option to fail, and they chose it. They totally attacked the giving, benevolent character of God and his holiness, one who is separated from sin. And he was walking in a relationship with Adam and Eve, but yet they chose to rebel directly against him. And to attack his character is a big, big deal. And so that's why, number two, Sproul says, we have to understand not only his character and holiness, how perfect he is, how good he's been to us, but we also have to understand the concept of justice based upon position. We understand this as Americans. I'll illustrate it this way. Let's say they were having a parade today in Murfreesboro, and I was the master of ceremonies. And they put me with the little crown on my head, right, and a little staff. I'm going around, and I'm riding in the back of the convertible, and we're coming up onto the downtown square, and somebody's up in the building, and they shoot a shotgun at me. They fire, pow! Now, they don't hit me. I'm sure the police scramble. They catch that person. What's going to happen to them? They might do a little bit of jail time. Maybe they complain they were crazy. They had a bad enchilada last night. I mean, who knows? Okay? They might say it was attempted murder, attempted manslaughter, might get a year or two or something like that. But let's change the scenario. Let's say that we're having a parade downtown Murfreesboro, and Joe Biden is the master of ceremony, and somebody pulls out a shotgun and fires at him. Now what's going to happen? Like you all know, like it's not just going to be a year in jail. And if you actually hit Joe Biden and kill him, then you will never, it's going to be one of those things where they say you're serving 100 consecutive life sentences. Why? What's the difference between Steve Willis and Joe Biden? Now, there are a lot of jokes that could go there, right? But seriously, what's the difference between our position? I'm just a little old pastor at Calvary Baptist Murfreesboro. But everybody has to understand it's not because of who Joe Biden is. It's because of his position as the most powerful man in the United States. And this is what we have to understand. One day Jesus was in a parade on Palm Sunday, and the world took aim at him, and they didn't just fire, they killed him. And we were all a part of that because every time we sin, that sin is poured out on Jesus and leading to his death on the cross. You ever think about that? Whenever you choose that little sin, to look at that picture a little longer than you should, to listen to words that just blaspheme the name of God, to say a harsh word to a child, to be unfaithful to someone who trusts you. Even the little things like we're filling out our taxes and Jesus says, render unto Caesar what's his. Just things like that. Whenever we do it, we take dead aim at Jesus and we put him on that cross. And I share that with you so that we can understand an attack on the person of Jesus is 1 billion times worse crime than what will land you in jail for 1,000 life sentences here on earth. It's not just because Jesus is a human. It's an attack upon God, a holy God himself. His position as God of the universe, any attack on him is worth an eternity in hell even more. Do you remember I said earlier about one of the attributes of God, foundation of his throne is his justice? So this is what God had to do because he's a just God. Remember, this will help you understand hell and explain hell to someone. Whether or not they will receive it in the light of the Spirit of truth is up to them and it's up to the Lord. But this is to help us understand the concept of hell. Get this, okay? We think about the infinite goodness, the eternal righteousness of God. And so an attack upon the eternal righteousness, goodness, our benevolent God, an attack upon him demands an eternal punishment because it is an attack eternally upon God, an eternal being. And so to picture it this way, if I do something a little bit wrong, the punishment fits the crime. We get that, right? If I do something just a little bit wrong, there's going to be just a little bit of punishment for justice. If I do something a little more wrong, then there's going to be a little more punishment for justice. Punishment fits the crime. And so what God has to do, because he is a just God, this is what he had to do. He thought, what is a fair and just punishment for an attack upon the most righteous being in the universe? A righteous being who will be a righteous being for all eternity. What is a right and just punishment for that? And the worst thing, the opposite end of God's eternal goodness is hell. It's an eternity in hell. But listen, hell is not as bad as God is good. I'll say that again. I want you to understand. Hell, as awful as it is not as bad as what God is good, because God is infinitely good. But what he has done is he created a hell that is as far away from good that he can possibly come up with to justify, to give justice to those who rebel against his ultimate goodness. And so, let me say it again another way. If you are fighting right now, if you think about hell and someone burning there forever, I mean, it is a hard concept to get, because you think, man, what could someone do so wrong that it would cause us to walk up a volcano and cast them into lava and watch them burn? And even if they die within 10 seconds, you would say that is cruel and inhumane punishment. Would you not? How could someone do that? How could a benevolent, loving God ever do that? And this is what I'm saying, is that God is ultimately also just. And the only just recompense, it's not even a just recompense for attacking the character of God, is an eternity in hell. And if you're struggling with that, as I do, I just have to remind myself of this fact. That if I'm fighting whether or not eternity in hell is too much of an attack, is too much punishment for attack upon God, then you have way too small of an appreciation for the holiness of God. I'm going to say that again. If you think hell is too much, then you think far too little of how great God is. That's justice. It's not even justice, because hell cannot be as bad as God is good. And my guess, my friends, listen, if we had just an inkling of what Jesus had in that garden about how great God is, then we wouldn't say that hell was too much. We would say it is far too little. And that's why Jesus is stressed out to the point of death. He is about to face the worst thing that he could ever create. The worst thing that we could ever experience. Something that is on the opposite end of his infinite goodness. He is about to experience an infinite place of evil, to suffer the hell that we all deserve, all 7 billion of us who are alive right now, and all the billions of people who have ever lived. And listen, my friends, if you and I knew how bad hell was going to be, my guess is that we would be sweating drops of blood right now too. We just can't fathom it, but Jesus could. So over and over, he keeps praying. He comes and finds them sleeping, and he says to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Like, dude, don't you have any idea what's about to happen? Could you not watch 1 hour? Could you not pay attention 1 hour? It's kind of like for my sermons, right? Can you not pay attention to one sermon? All right. Watch and pray. There it is again. Watch. Pray that you may not enter into temptation. I love that. Like, we're never told to pray that we can deal with temptation. We're praying that we can avoid it. That's my prayer. God, help me stand strong in a time of temptation. That's not my prayer. Like, God, don't let me be tempted, because a lot of times I will fail. As he says later in the passage, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Indeed, it is. And again, Jesus goes away and he's praying earnestly, saying the same words. Lord, is there another way? Is there another option? And then he comes back and he finds the disciples sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy and they didn't know what to answer him. It's 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. He goes back and prays, and he comes back a third time. And he says, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It's enough. That's it. I'm not praying anymore. Man, this is a pivot. This is a hinge. It's a turn. That's it, boys. Just get up. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hand of sinners. Like, I can see him, like you can see the city walls. They're not very far. I mean, it's just like from here over across the road to PCA. That's where the Garden of Gethsemane is, from the walls of Jerusalem. And here he sees torches coming down at 3 in the morning. This can't be good. It's kind of like seeing the flashing police lights in your rearview mirror. Like, it's not a good sign. So here he sees them coming to arrest him. And he says, boys, get up. And then I love this command. I love this about Jesus. He says, rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. Man, I love this about Jesus. I want you to get this picture. As bad as hell is, Jesus didn't run from hell, he ran to it. He didn't run away from the fire, he ran into it. Let me say this before I go on. Listen, if there's anybody here in this room who's running into hell right now, there's a reason Jesus was so stressed out. He's trying to warn you. I don't do this a lot, but I got to ask a question. When is the last time any of you lost sleep over the notion of hell? If the thought of experiencing Satan's hell was enough to stress Jesus out, how do you think we should be acting? I sometimes wonder why we do anything other than warn people about hell. It's that serious. But knowing how bad hell was, what he was about to experience, an eternity's worth of hell, because he is God, he's able to do that while he's on the cross. He says to his disciples, let's go. Let's go. Come on, Judas, let's go. That's how much Jesus loves you. It got him up off his knees and he ran into the fiery pits of hell for your sake, because he wants you to be with him in heaven forever. This fall, just 6 months from now, we'll be celebrating the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. I know this church was just starting right then, and I don't know if it was packed out that day. I just remember back in West Virginia, like all our churches were full. And we mourned the loss of over 2,000 people. Planes coming from everywhere, flying into buildings, into the Pentagon, crashing into the ground. Over 2,000 United States citizens lost their lives. But did you know this? 9/11, 2001 was the deadliest day for firefighters in the history of the United States. 343 New York City firefighters, including the fire chief, first deputy commissioner, and the department chaplain, lost their lives. Why? Because they ran into the fire, not from it. 8 New York City paramedics, 23 police officers. Port Authority Police Department lost another 37. Why? Because like Jesus, they all ran into the fire. This is the thing that amazes me about the capacity of human beings to forget about themselves in a moment of crisis and run into suffering, run to whatever they have to, not thinking about their own lives, not even thinking about their own families, but going in to save people that they have never met. All for the call of duty. My friends, listen. In the same way Jesus says, rise, let us be going, and he went into hell and suffering, my statement to you is today as the church, are we willing to rise up and run to suffering for the sake of people we've yet to meet? For people that Jesus gave his life for so they wouldn't spend an eternity in hell. Are you willing to go through a short time of suffering and sacrifice in this life? Like, what is it that we're running into right now, sacrifice-wise, to save the world from going to a sinner's hell? The capacity for greatness is within us. Fallen humans as we are at our best when we give up our best for the sake of the best of others. And we saw it in those heroes that day. I'll close with 3 takeaways of the day. Number 1 is this. If hell kept Jesus awake at night, where does that leave us? When is the last time you lost sleep over an unsaved individual? I remember one of the things that just absolutely changed my life, my senior year in high school. Had 3 friends that I was supposed to go with them to a concert in downtown Charleston, West Virginia. Supposed to be 100,000 people at it, outdoor concert. We were going to meet down there, and Some of them had started drinking, and I wasn't in the car, and I thank God for that, because I got down there and I wasn't finding many of my friends. And finally, one of my best girlfriends, friends of this girl, came up to me just crying. She said, "Steve, have you heard?" I said, "What?" She named the three guys and said, they were killed in an accident. All three of them are dead. This is right before the start of my senior year. And I obviously didn't stay for the concert. I went home and I just cried. And I'll tell you why I cried. It's because I'd played sports with all three of those guys in some fashion. One of them in particular I rode with all the time on the football bus going to away games. We'd sit there and we would talk about girls, school, a little bit of sports. We talked about everything we could possibly talk about, but I never talked to him about his relationship with Jesus. Played basketball with one of the guys, did a bunch of basketball trips. I remember him well. He's just sitting there and, again, talk about everything, never talked about Jesus. Now, I don't know exactly where these guys were. I don't know if they went to Bible school when they were younger. I don't know what kind of decisions they made for Christ. I'm just saying I personally never had that discussion with them, these classmates of mine, and asked them, where do you stand with Jesus? Do you trust in Jesus as your Savior? Have you asked him to forgive you for your sins? And that night I had a dream. I'm not saying it's from God or it's not one of these Muhammad Joseph Smith deals. I'm just saying I had a dream, just a dream. And during the dream, I'm standing at the pearly gates, and there's two lines there, and I'm in one line. I look over, and I see one of my buddies in another line. I didn't see all three of them, just saw one. And so we're standing there, and we start to walk in through the pearly gates. This is a very vivid dream. We start to walk in, and I look back, and I'm like, "Hey, aren't you coming?" And an angel said, "Nope, they're not allowed in." And I remember in my dream making eye contact with my friend, and even though he didn't say it out loud, his eyes told me everything. "Steve, why didn't you ever warn me about this day?" And my entrance into the pearly gates was not one of joy, but I cried the entire time. And I woke up from that dream like at 5 a.m. And I got down on my knees beside my bed and I said, "Dear God, there will not be one other person graduate from East Bank High School this year before I graduate my senior year. There will be not one single person that graduates from my high school that I don't share the gospel of Jesus with, because I'm never going to have that dream again." I still bear that burden to this day. If hell keeps Jesus up at night, where does that leave us? There is a heaven to gain, but yes, there's also a hell to pay if people don't come to a saving knowledge of Jesus. We can sit here in church and we can shake hands and we can love each other and hug one another. And the reality of it is, within miles of this campus, there are thousands of people who don't know Jesus. If they die today, they will burn in hell forever. And if hell keeps Jesus awake at night, where does that leave us? When's the last time you lost sleep because you say, "I cannot wait another moment until I've shared Jesus with my loved one, until I share Jesus with my coworker," and we're sitting here thinking like, "Well, I don't want to be uncomfortable between us." How uncomfortable will it be on Judgment Day if they can look at you and say, "Why didn't you ever share Christ with me?" Jesus says it this way: "Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life, but whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him." My friends, this is serious business what we're doing here. I had a pastor ask me along, "Pastor Steve, why are you meeting? Like, you still spreading people out or whatever?" And this is a burden for me. Like, I'm not going to stop proclaiming the gospel of Christ. I'm not going to stop challenging people to go out and share the love of Christ with others. We can't stop this. It's more important than anything else we do. Takeaway of the day number 2. This is encouraging to me. Listen, if Jesus struggled with living out the Father's will, difficult as it was, should we be surprised If we struggle as well, listen, sometimes it's hard to be a good dad. Sometimes it's hard to sit in church and pay attention. Sometimes it's hard to be a good witness at school. Sometimes it's hard to be a good wife to a husband who just doesn't seem like he loves you back. And I would just say to you, man, a lot of times you look at it like, oh, I'm awful for feeling this way. Jesus felt that way sometimes. It's not easy following the will of God in our lives. We struggle with it, but if Jesus struggled with it, should we be surprised if we struggle as well? It's okay to struggle. That's not sin. But just do the right thing. Do what God's called you to do, even if that means you may be having a sacrifice of our own. And that's the last takeaway today. If Jesus ran into the fire for us, are we willing to run to a sacrifice of our own? What price? What physical sacrifice are you willing to make so that people hear the gospel? What spiritual and emotional sacrifices are you willing to make so that the people around you will know there's a God in heaven who loves them, who gave his life on a cross to spare them from his wrath? What financial price are you willing to pay to make sure the gospel goes forth to all nations, especially here in Murfreesboro? If Jesus ran into the fire for you, are you willing to run to a sacrifice of your own?